Hi, Tony DeWitt here, Missouri appellate attorney and a guy who tries to make the law make sense here on YouTube. Today we're going to talk about something that every lawyer knows a lot about. It's called documentation. And I'll get to that in just a moment. Now, for those of you who know me from my healthcare background, you know I've given this presentation a number of times about why it's necessary to document everything you do. When you work in healthcare, obviously, you're making medical records, and medical records are the documentation of the care that's been delivered. But the fact is that documentation is helpful in every line of endeavor. Whether you are building car parts in a factory in Alabama or catching fish in Alaska, you can document things in such a way as to protect yourself from eventual lawsuits. There is absolutely nothing that will prevent someone from suing you for anything and for any reason. I can't prevent you as your lawyer from being sued. And if I could, I'd be the richest lawyer in the free world. But the fact of the matter is, people can sue you for anything, for any reason. There is a very famous case, United States ex rel. Gerald Mayo versus Satan and his minions, where a gentleman sued Satan in federal court for throwing obstacles in front of him. These are the kinds of things that illustrate just how wacky people get when it comes to the law. People sue for really crazy things. But because people do bring lawsuits for really crazy things, it is a good idea when you have interactions that might produce a lawsuit that you make good notes and document the heck out of what happens. Let me give you an example. Let's suppose you have an employee who just is not making the grade. No matter what you do, they just don't get it. They either can't keep up, they work too slow, or they work faster and they make mistakes that wind up costing you money. And at some point, you've just had enough and you terminate them. Well, the likelihood that somebody might bring a lawsuit in that situation is fairly high. I'd say at least 50%. Because people invest a lot of their self-worth in their job. And as a result of that, when you tell somebody, you're fired, get out of here, the problem is that they think that that means that they are not a good person. Now, that's not what you mean. You just mean that they're not a good worker. But people take it personally. I know because I've been fired, and boy, did I take it personally. But the bottom line is that if you have to terminate employees, you need to document. Everything has to be documented in minute detail if at all possible. You know, George came into work 5 minutes late on June 1st. On June 3rd, he came in 10 minutes late. On June 9th, he came in 5 minutes late. We sat down and talked to him about the importance of being on time. The next day, he came in even later. We again sat down and talked with him about being on time. He told us he'd do his best to get here on time. And then for 2 to 3 days, he didn't have a problem. And then at the end of the week, he called it quits and said, nope, I'm not coming into work on time today, and wound up being 20 minutes late. You have to document each one of those interactions. And then if you have a policy on what you do with regard to employees who receive discipline, you have to follow that policy. You don't want to deviate from that policy, because that makes it look like the reason for the termination is something other than his perpetual tardiness. And people are very creative about why you may be firing them. Maybe it's their race, maybe it's their religion, maybe you don't even know what their religion is, but they can still make a credible claim that, you fired them because of their religion. Whatever it is, if you have the documentation, it makes it much easier for you to defend yourself in court. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, why would I need to document that? I was there every day when the joker came in late. Why would I have to document that? Well, you'd have to document it because you have to prove it in court, and you have to prove it to 12 people who are going to sit on a jury and decide whether or not you are a fair person or not. And if you have your ducks in a row and the documentation all lined up and you explain each one of those items, then you look a lot more credible than somebody who says, look, the guy was a jerk and he didn't come in on time. Well, can you show us how? No, I didn't write any of that down. Well, that makes you look like you're a jerk. So one of the things that I always ask people is, can you remember what you had for lunch on Tuesday, March 30th of last year? If you can remember what you had on that date, it's either because you always have the same thing for lunch every day, or because March 30th is your birthday or your anniversary or something like that. For the most part, you could pick any day over the last couple of months and ask yourself what you had for lunch on that day, and you couldn't remember. And the reason is because that's not important to you. Things that are not important to you wash out of your memory over time. And because they wash out of memory over time, you have to write things that are important down and make notes and make documentation. Meet your lawyer halfway. Meet your lawyer halfway by creating some really good documentation that he can rely on, not only when he defends you, but when he questions the person who's suing you. It works not only in that situation, it works in customer service situations. For example, where you sell somebody a piece of software or a piece of equipment, and they either don't understand how to use it or they're not particularly good at it, and you go back and you do additional training and that sort of thing, and then at some point they say, well, we're not paying for this. That's the reason why you have to have good documentation to show A, that the product works, and B, that it works when it's operated properly, because then you have a stronger case for why they should not be able to receive their money back. Documentation is a key thing for lawyers because documentation makes it much easier for us to prove cases to a group of 12 people who don't know you from Adam. So that's the short and dirty on documentation. If you found this useful or helpful or thought-provoking, I would really appreciate it if you'd give me a thumbs up. If you haven't already, would you go over here and slap on that subscribe icon and touch the notification bell so that you can be notified every time we release a video on this channel. Thank you so much for watching. Have a terrific day, and I'll catch you on here next time.